Okay, it's 10 o'clock, so why don't we get started slowly and hope that the rest will be joining us soon. This is going to be a little bit unusual for me because I can't see you and then I can't hear you, but it reminds me of the times when I was teaching undergraduate students, and every time I have an early morning class, I would have a very silent room to deal with. So I'm going to lean on that experience. Anyway, thank you and welcome to today's webinar. As you know, the title is Smart Ways Nudging for Sustainability, and what we're going to do is talk about or borrow insights from behavioral economics and see how they can help us with some of the goals and the objectives that we have set for ourselves in the context of sustainability. So just quickly, the outline for today. I will start by asking you to type quickly who is here and from where. Then we will talk briefly, or actually refresh what are the key principles in behavioral thinking, in behavior smart thinking. Then we will look at some examples and hopefully some interesting illustrations, and we'll dive into the main tool that I hope will help you translate some of these insights and examples into actions that you can implement and execute in your own context. And then we're going to break down the discussion into some of the specific priorities that have been identified at earlier phases through the survey that you have completed, and we'll talk about how we can execute that together. In addition to using the chat function in a moment for introduction, I would like to invite you to post their questions and comments. If I don't see them in the moment, or if I am just finishing a sentence, I will come back to them, but I will try to answer them as we go. We'll also take a couple of breaks during the webinar, but if you need to stop, or if I need to go back or give another break, just let me know and we can do that. The idea for us is to make this as fun and exciting as possible. So just giving you one more moment to introduce yourself and indicate who is here and from where. Thank you, Nina. Hello. Goril. Anna-Lena. I can see some more names. I hope that all of you can hear me and see me well. Okay, while you're continuing with introductions, why don't I tell you also a little bit about myself? I introduced myself to you in more details when we saw each other in Narvik more than half a year ago. But just a reminder of what is my background and why behavior smart is a topic that I'm passionate about. I'm a researcher and educator focusing on traveler behavior, and particularly interested in how trends and dynamics in our industry are or relate to behavioral principles. I'm currently finishing a book on behavioral economics, and I apologize, the date is changed. It should be 2020. It's coming out later this year. As I said, thanks to my education both in sustainable tourism and psychology, I am passionate about seeking to link the insights from behavioral sciences with some of the fundamental challenges that our industry is facing in the last decade, especially. Throughout my career, I've worked in more than 20 countries with different level of development, with different ambitions in terms of their tourism strategies and have always sought to apply a behavioral lens to advancing the sustainable tourism success of sustainable tourism initiatives. So this is me. Thank you, and hello, Maria, Damiela. I see more people saying hello. Okay, why don't we dive further? As I said, I will start with a refresher of what is behavioral economics. I know that in your immediate reaction might be, well, we already listened to this several months ago, but this is a great way for us to kind of refresh our minds and to remind ourselves what are some of these key principles, because between the time when we saw each other and now, of course, a lot of things have gone through our minds, and we have gone through many events and work assignments and activities. So just a quick refresher on what is behavioral economics, which is the fundamental knowledge domain from which we're extracting insight in order to develop behavior smart solutions. So what behavioral economics does is look at the whole spectrum of different decisions that we might make in our social and our private life. And they can be from anything, from why or shall I recycle, or how would I recycle, how consistent will I be, what would be my decision as to where I should study, where I should travel, when will I start my next diet, and more strategic decisions as to how much I'm going to save and what's going to be the insurance plan that I'm going to choose for my private health insurance. We know from our current realities, from our contemporary living, that in many of these cases, people are making decisions on one side that don't seem to be optimal in terms of the benefits that they're extracting. That's one thing. And the second thing is that we now are clear that even if people really want and are convinced that they want to do something, in many cases, some things happen and deviate them from the path of actually executing their own decision. So what behavioral economics does is look at this whole area of decisions and try to understand what are the decision steps that the decision maker takes, and what is really the journey that leads them to the certain choice, and of course to executing that choice. It looks at what are the incentives and the barriers that actually shape the behavior that we say, because in some cases we would do something because we're really motivated to do something. In other cases, we are not doing something because of some barriers, and these barriers can be objective. Maybe we just don't have the possibility, maybe there's physical constraints, but in other cases it's just intangible psychological barriers that actually prevent us from doing or from choosing the best that we can. And we're going to talk about that and how we are going to use that in the work that we do. One of the things that has been formulated as a result of behavioral economics, and we talked about that last June, is the fact that we seem to be deviating from rationality in the way that rationality is defined and has been defined for many decades by science. So what that means is that in a situation that when you have a portfolio of choices, people very often are actually not making the best choice, even though they have the information that they need and they have the freedom to choose from the options. And behavioral science, behavioral economics seeks to explain why that happens through the different incentives and barriers that we mentioned earlier. And more importantly, it seeks to redesign systems in our society in order to help people and make sure that people actually make the best possible decisions. Okay, so just a reminder of why is it that we don't always make the optimal choices or the most practical choices, let's say. In general, and of course this is oversimplification, but just to remind you, there are two big reasons why our decision making is prone to some mistakes, so to say. The first one is that our brain is genetically wired to preserve energy and resources. So what that means is that in any moment, it can avoid going into the full lengthy process of looking at the different options, analyzing each of them in terms of benefits and costs, and then based on this detailed analysis to choose an option. It's going to really avoid that. So every time it can avoid this lengthy and resource intense process, it's going to avoid it. And this is just because it's biologically wired as the most important, or one of the most important organs in our body, to really preserve energy and save it for really important moments. The other big reason why we are not optimal in our decision making is the fact that in many cases our brains are occupied with more than one thing. So just a quick example. If you are in the middle of a very busy workday and you need to make a decision about what to have for lunch, the reality is that there are many factors that will likely lead you to make a quick decision that's not always going to be the healthiest or the most nutritious one. And the reason why this is happening is that your brain is already preoccupied with some of these work tasks that you have to go over and to complete. And so your brain really needs to tick this off, to tick this decision off as fast as possible. So it's going to use less rational and less optimal tactics to arrive at that decision. The mechanics that explain why this happens and why, when our brain is a little bit lazy and or busy, we end up making suboptimal decisions, is that our decision-making system actually consists of two systems, so to speak: System 1 and System 2. System 1 is our childlike, impatient, very emotional, jumpy decision-making system, and it really is motivated and is wired to make fast decisions based on all possible hints and shortcuts that prevent or that eliminate the need to go through a lengthy, detailed, analytical identification of the best choice or the desired choice, so to say. The second is our System 2. This is our analytical, wise, rational, carefully weighing options system. System 2, when it kicks in, and when it's not too lazy to kick in, it actually really identifies choices on the basis of analysis of all the available information, comparison of options, in order to really identify the one that's best given the information and the circumstances. So what are some examples that illustrate these shortcuts that our brain would sometimes use in order to, when it's busy or lazy? So this, I believe that I use this example, but it's really one of the brilliant ones to show how the context or the options that we have in a current moment actually are more powerful in terms of influencing what size coffee, for example, we're going to have today at the office, or what size of cake or something else that we are going to have for dessert. And the idea here is that we naturally, the fastest way to choose when you have three options is usually to go to the middle, because it does feel like the safest option. It's neither too small, it's neither too large, so you go with the middle. The interesting thing is that the size that you end up choosing actually really depends on what's the middle. So in the first scenario, you can have a moderately large cup of coffee, but in the second one, you might end up having a much larger cup of coffee simply because it's the middle. So it's more the context and the choices that you have that drive the choice and seem to decide how much caffeine you're going to consume rather than your own rational, health-conscious thinking. Another quick example, and this is one of my favorite one. I believe I also used it last time. This is an example of how we rely on us being much better decision makers tomorrow. So if next week we are planning what we're going to have for dessert, and we have the option of a healthy apple or a sweet, most of us would consciously realize that they need to cut sweets and they need to stay on a more healthy diet, and they would be confident that they will choose the apple over the sweet. Now, come the time when we actually have to make that choice, and the ratios usually flip. So at the moment of the choice, we actually are much more likely to get tempted and actually eat the sweet, even though yesterday or the week before we were absolutely confident that our choice would be the wiser one and the healthier one. Okay. I want to end the examples or the illustrations of these decision-making principles with a more serious example than the two that I just used for illustration. In fact, and I don't think I talked about that last time. So this research or the results of this research project were among the most important factors that actually suddenly increased the visibility of behavioral economics as a domain which seems to be uncovering important and valuable insights about areas which are of great importance to society. So let me tell you the story. Two researchers, who are the authors of the paper from which this graph comes, decided to analyze the different rates of enrollment in organ donation program in a relatively large sample of countries. And what they found was really, really very interesting. The visual here illustrates that. There wasn't a great variability of the rates across the country. There were two groups of countries which were very, very visible. One of them was the group of countries where the rates of enrollment in organ donation programs were up in the 90s. You can see 99.98% of everybody was enrolled, 99.91, and so on and so forth. And then there was the other extreme, countries where there's actually very low levels of enrollment. And you can see varying from 4 or 5% to 12 or 17. The Netherlands is sort of an exception because this high result was achieved after very long, very intensive, and very expensive public education and awareness campaigns, which were initiated by the government. But in general, the countries were either in the top extreme or in the low extreme. So, of course, this was a very interesting outcome, and the two researchers dived into the information they had in order to establish what is the factor that determines that. The first explanation that came to their mind was maybe there were cultural differences. But if you notice, there's actually countries with very similar cultures or culturally similar countries that are at the two extremes. So a quick example is Germany, which you see is at 12, and Austria, which is above 99. It's almost 100%. So this wasn't the explanation. After a lot of research, what they found was that the only factor that actually explained one or the other was the form that was used, or the design of the form that was used to enroll in the program. In the countries on the right, with the blue graphs, which are up in the 90s and above, the default option is actually that you are enrolled in the program. On the left, the yellow countries are countries where you actually have to proactively make the choice to enroll in the organ donation program. And what's interesting is that in both countries, surveys indicate relatively similar levels of confirmation that people on a value level, they agree that it's best for society, for them and their relatives, God forbid, to actually have a well-doing organ donation program and high enrollment in society. And that's valid across all countries, except that the reality is that when you, even if on value level you agree, when you actually have to make the decision, it's not really a pleasant decision that you want to make. So in such cases, what do? We just dismiss the choice that we have, and we go with what's the default option. So in the countries on the right, the default option is that you're automatically enrolled. You have the freedom to not be in the program. You just have to actively mark that you don't want to enroll in the program. Otherwise, you're automatically enrolled. And the countries on the left, vice versa. You are not enrolled by default, and you have to proactively choose that you are enrolled. So you can see that something as simple as the design of the form can really dramatically change the situation for something so important for a society and its health, such as organ donation enrollment. So I wanted to give that example just to illustrate that behavioral insights have actually already informed a lot of policy solutions and a lot of social redesign projects, because they actually are quite powerful in solving very, very important and complex issues, such as the one that we see here. In September, a few months ago, I was in London at the biggest conference of behavioral scientists, and one of the presentations was from the government of the UK. And by the way, the UK is the leader in applying behavior smart thinking for policy and for social programs. And the gentleman talked about the fact that this research actually prompted the redesign of organ donation and the enrollment programs. And so now the government actually has a very clear statistic about the number of people who are out there living and having a chance to live healthily after having benefited from organ donation, and the numbers are actually quite staggering. So you can see that something as simple as redesigning a form can actually save many, many lives. Okay, now on to a little bit lighter topics. We talked about these mechanics of explaining behavior and decision making and suboptimal choosing. We talk about the fact that the decision making, these decision making patterns are explained by the fact that we are either busy or there's something that requires that we preserve our brain resources. Why is it important for us in the tourism industry? And I remember that I talked a little bit more about that when we were together in June, but want to remind you that the main reason why this really matters in our industry is that we are increasingly dealing with busy, distracted, and multitasking customers, travelers, who come into our home and whose behavior and choices actually impact our home, our places, our businesses, our assets. So in that sense, all of the knowledge that we can extract in order to understand better how we can shift the systems, how we can adjust our assumptions in order to really influence or get the best out of the behavior of our travelers, is welcome. And if you ask me, given the big challenges that we're dealing with today, absolutely important. Okay, I'm moving on to the next section, but I do want to stop for a moment and check whether you have any questions or comments to everything that I shared. Do you remember most of these insights from our talk in June last year? Please use the chat function to respond or to comment. Okay, so you remember that. I'm glad. Thank you, Hilda. How about the others? Do you remember some of these? Was it helpful to repeat them? Okay. Thank you, Damiela. Thank you. Thank you, Nina. I do hope so. I'm a little biased here because this is a topic that I'm so passionate about. I can skip sleeping for 48 hours and just read and explore and think and work on that. Yes, Rauno, I agree. Repeat is good because just like our travelers and our clients, we are constantly multitasking and are dealing with many, many things. So even if something was interesting and impressed us at the moment, we can't always just simply remember it, the full content in its entirety. Okay. Lily and Guriel, repeat, please. Do you want me to repeat something, or you're just confirming that repeat was okay? I'm just waiting to see. Please give a short repeat of the topic. You mean of behavioral economics? Okay, and so what you're suggesting was that what I talked about or the few examples that I gave are not sufficient? Okay, so why don't we do that? I see that maybe we need a little bit more, but the way that I have designed the presentation is now to move towards some examples and illustrations, which are to some extent from our industry, not all of them. But why don't we dive into those? And then if we still have some questions and if I still need to give some explanation, I'm more than happy to. Besides, another important resource where you can quickly and in a very understandable way get a primer on behavioral economics and behavior smart thinking is the Smart Ways Manual, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Okay? All right. Thank you, Lily. And again, there will be moments later when I will be giving you the opportunity to talk or to ask questions, rather. So, as I said, I want to give you a few examples of how behavior smart thinking would look like and would differ from the more automatic or classical ways in which we have been doing things, or many of us have been doing things. So what I would like to start with is an excerpt from the TED Talk of Rory Sutherland, whose picture you see on the screen now. This is one of the big fans, so to speak, of behavior smart thinking in the advertising and marketing circles. And he uses a brilliant example to illustrate what is the difference, or how different solutions can be when you are taking a classical sort of mechanical engineering approach, and when you actually try to apply behavioral thinking and to think through the perspective of how the traveler, the guest, would feel and think and experience a certain situation. So let's go to the video and then we'll go back. Just a second. Excuse me for a moment. My link is missing. Sorry about that. Just a second. I will start that.
6 billion.
Okay. So here. Okay. Can you see now the screen of the video? Yes, perfect. Okay, I'm going to start just that section that I would like you to listen to.
Limited resources in the creation of things. Here's one example. This is a train which goes from London to Paris. The question was given to a bunch of engineers about 15 years ago. How do we make the journey to Paris better? And they came up with a very good engineering solution, which was to spend £6 billion building completely new tracks from London to the coast and knocking about 40 minutes off a 3.5-hour journey time. Now, call me Mr. Picky, I'm just an ad man, but it strikes me as a slightly unimaginative way of improving a train journey merely to make it shorter. Now, what is the hedonic opportunity cost of spending £6 billion on a load of railway tracks? Here's my naive advertising man's suggestion. What you should in fact do is employ all of the world's top male and female supermodels, pay them to walk the length of the train handing out free Chateau Petrus for the entire duration of the journey. Now, you'll still have about £3 billion left in change, and people will ask for the trains to be slowed down. Now,
okay, I hope that that you enjoy that. But as I promised you, this is a brilliant example of how different perspectives, behavior-based or human-centered versus technical or engineering or physical world-centered, can end up producing very, very different outcomes and very different solutions. One of the things that Rory mentioned was also the price tag that comes with the two. And actually, one of the really powerful benefits of behavior smart thinking is that in many cases, you end up with a much cheaper and easier solution that actually ends up producing much more powerful results. Just to refer back to the example that I gave you earlier with the organ donation enrollment program, I mentioned briefly that the Netherlands, who were on the yellow side, actually had a relatively high rate for a yellow country, and that was the result of multi-million investments of the government in awareness campaigns. So you see that on one side we have the multi-million education and awareness campaigns. On the other side, we have a simple redesign of a paper form, and the cost of that is close to nothing, and it produces such powerful results. So that was just the example that I wanted to start this section with, so that we can see how we can apply that to other contexts. Another favorite example that I like sharing is a project that was started in Cambridge Labs a few years ago, and it's called Happy Maps. And what Happy Maps do is actually, just like Rory Sutherland explained, move away from the technical, sometimes boring, kind of engineering view, and actually take a human-centered view. So, as most of you know, or actually all of us know, maps are designed on the basis of the assumption that we actually want to get from point A to point B in the shortest possible time and in the easiest possible way. The reality that Happy Maps, or the disruption that Happy Maps proposes, is that actually there's another way or another approach that you can take to designing routes and choosing routes. And that's especially valid for our industry, where it's all about the experience. It's not about covering more distance. And what Happy Maps do is that they produce different routes that they recommend to you based on what might be a route where you can see some interesting things which are going to engage your sight, your hearing, maybe your smell, so that you can experience more and end up arriving in the point B happier and more elevated. We can also recommend routes which are most beautiful. So maybe, this is a route that's not going to take you from point A to point B in 10 minutes. It's going to take you in 14 minutes. But actually, you walk through two absolutely stunning streets, very colorful, very pleasant, and exciting to see, and maybe some gardens and fountains, places which would really elevate and give you the sense of beauty of the place. We can also recommend routes that are most quiet, if that's the experience that we are seeking. But you can see that the approach actually is to generate or to incorporate in the map mechanism the quality of the environment and the happiness of the user, rather than the mechanical time or distance difference. And what you get as a result of that is much higher level of engagement with the place. You know that one of the challenges that we are dealing with in the contemporary tourism space is that we often end up having travelers who somehow are physically present, but because they're distracted with their devices and many other things, they end up not mindfully experiencing the place. And that's a fantastic way to actually engage people, make them really feel and experience and see the best of a place. Walking or moving from one place to the other ends up being part of the experience. So this is similar to the example that was in the video. If you make the transport or the travel between point A, point B, let's say on a bus, on a train, or whatever, pleasant, by transforming it into experience, people are actually going to want more of it and not less of it, as is now the standard thinking. And of course, ultimately, such approach, less mechanic and human-centered approach, actually increases the level of happiness. And what's a more desired outcome of our industry than actually to make sure that travelers, guests, visitors are happier when they depart at the end of their visit. So this is an example of how the engineering perspective is to design the solution in order to get you in the fastest and shortest possible way. But actually, the behavioral perspective suggests that the experience is much better than the pure efficiency. Okay, now, another example, I think I mentioned that when we were together in June, but I will repeat it because it's really the most important and probably the biggest, most significant execution of using behavior smart thinking for something so important as the impact of air travel on climate and the environment. So the story here is the following. Virgin Atlantic, which, as you know, tends to be a disruptor and innovator, a few years ago decided, just as behavioral economics was actually rising, decided to employ behavior smart thinking and see whether that could help solve one of their problems with fuel efficiency. Now, what was the problem with fuel efficiency? The problem was that obviously Virgin Atlantic had fantastically well-trained, extremely professional pilots. All of them had their manuals with all of the steps, the actions, the solutions that a pilot might need as part of their work. In that manual, and of course in the training that they have received, there are very clearly spelled out tactics that pilots should use in order to optimize the fuel efficiency of flights. And these are things such as, for example, when the plane has already landed and is taxiing towards the exits, to actually turn off one engine and just remain on one. And that's absolutely sufficient and absolutely safe. There are other techniques which are, again, very simple to execute and don't jeopardize safety in any way, that allow pilots to actually regulate the consumption of fuel based on weather conditions during the flight. The fact of the matter is that these techniques were out there, they were clear and known to the pilots, but they were actually not executing them. They were sort of going with the what was easiest, and that was to not do much and just leave fuel efficiency to be what it is. Now, what Virgin Atlantic, together with a group of fantastic behavioral scientists, decided to test is a set of interventions, nudges, that would actually motivate pilots to start using what they already know. So this is just a great example of how the classical thinking that as long as you have information, you're going to actually apply it and do the right thing is not correct. So there were three things that the company did. One was simply to start sending at the end of the month an email summary of the performance of each pilot in terms of fuel efficiency. So it was just like you receive your electricity bill, pilots were receiving a bill of how well they have been doing in terms of fuel efficiency behavior. Another group received the summary, but it also was given the opportunity to set efficiency targets. So for example, they see their summary for this month, and then they have the choice to say, okay, I'm actually going to improve this performance by another 5% next month. And if they actually do, they would be rewarded for that. And what was really exceptionally interesting was that these, as you can imagine, the investment to actually do this was absolutely nothing compared to the many other investments that airplanes, maintenance, or airlines require. So the results were really staggering. You can see some of the numbers here, but you can see that the outcome, the outcome both in terms of environmental impact as well as financial benefits was actually quite significant. And what turned out to be really the most powerful nudge, let's say, was actually the first. Just the mere fact that the company monitors this, declares that this is important. So this alone actually was the most powerful changer of pilot behavior. So going back to our behavioral versus engineering perspective, from an engineering perspective, the solutions that we seek in order to lower the emissions from flying and the impact on climate of airlines is to optimize technology of airplanes, to develop new kinds of fuels, and so on. which are, of course, fantastic initiatives, and they should continue to be invested in. Society needs to move to healthier and better and optimal technologies. But what's really staggering is that you can achieve really significant savings now if you apply behavioral thinking and just adjust the incentives of that would change the behavior of pilots. Now, these results were generated only by one airline. Can you imagine what would be the impact if suddenly all airlines all over the world apply such nudges? We are going to really see a very, very significant cleaning or lowering of the negative impact that airlines have on our Earth and our climate. So, a great illustration of how sometimes the softer behavioral perspective can actually produce results now, and that's another reason why we are looking at these and we are thinking about how we can start applying them now. So another example, this one comes from Sweden, and this is a startup company called Carbonaid. Carbonaid is the solution, and it was found by a group of climate researchers. So what is the solution? What Carbonaid does is to allow restaurants, it's a service that is available to restaurants and food service providers. And so what it does is that it allows, on the basis of scientific principles and systems, to actually generate climate footprint values of each of the meals that they have on their menu. And the way that this happens is that, of course, through mechanics that work on the back end, when the chefs enter the very detailed and very precise recipes that go into the preparation of each of the menu items, the system automatically generates that value. Now, it's not simply that it generates this value, but it actually classifies the meals based on their climate impact into green or climate friendly, into average ones, and climate intensive ones. And in order to really nudge or produce the behavioral effect that is being aimed here, is being pursued, they actually allow, what the system allows is actually to add an indicator on the menu of the restaurant using green, yellow, and red to indicate the class of each meal. So you see here the visualization on the left. You can see that the first two meals are green, so they're climate friendly. The ceviche is average, and then we have the lamb and potatoes, which is climate heavy. Now, why is this interesting? It's interesting because it simplifies something that's very complex. We know that a lot of people think that climate change is an important issue and all of us should be contributing in some way or another every day. However, none of us are scientists, are climate scientists, and have the knowledge to know that what kind of food we eat can have significant impact, what kind of groceries we buy, what kind of clothes we buy, or how we dispose of them. All of these basic everyday acts, we are not used to associating them with something as complex and sort of overwhelming as climate change. So what this solution does is that it simplifies it. It probably oversimplifies it, but it actually makes it possible for people to act. It simplifies. It also presents it in the moment when you're making the choice, because I can read a great, very interesting educational article on the different types of foods and how they associate with climate impact, but that can be 1 hour before lunch. Come lunchtime, I'm not going to make a connection, or there's less chance that I can make the connection between the article I've read and actually my meal choices. So here we have tactic of actually presenting that, making it in the factor in the moment when that decision is going to take place. And of course, it's fun because it's like a traffic light. So what this does is basically helps make climate a factor in choice making. I do want to explain that what happens is that it doesn't become the most important factor. Let's not, be idealistic here. But what happens is that I think most of you can relate to that. So we usually, when we are looking at a restaurant menu, we end up choosing 2 or 3, and we seem to be sort of hesitating between them. This is when actually the climate indicator becomes important. So as you're wondering between these 2 and 3, and you're really not sure because you actually also like chicken, but you were kind of feeling like having fish, this indicator can actually nudge you to choose the greener option. And that's how it actually makes an impact. And the reality is that the impact measurements suggest that up to between 10 and 20% is really the shift towards more climate-friendly meals that is usually observed in restaurants and food service providers when they use solutions like this. I do want to mention also something interesting. When we were, I was interviewing Carbonaid for the book that I mentioned earlier, because they're one of the cases that I use there as well. And so we talked about measuring results and how the behavior of the buyers, the clients changes, and so on and so forth. But what was exceptionally interesting was that the adoption of the system changed the behavior of chefs. After they had the system, they took this as a challenge to actually keep making their menus more and more climate friendly. So they would make adjustments to the ingredients or the quality of the ingredients so that they could keep pushing the climate footprint of each of their meal. So one of the side effects, unexpected for the Carbonaid team, was that chefs began actually changing their behavior and their choice making. So I see a question about whether it's possible to read more about Carbonaid. Absolutely, I will share the link when we take a break. So again, just to kind of analyze this example from an engineering and a behavioral perspective, the engineering thinking and the classical thinking is that if you give people the full information, scientific backing of food choices, they're going to automatically become more efficient in their climate friendly eating behavior. The reality is that we can actually influence choice with simple nudges which come in the right moment when the decision is actually happening. Okay, another quick example. This relates to sustainable behavior. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this platform. It's called Adventure Junkie. It has won numerous awards in the last several years as a great company that stimulates and enables sustainable traveler behavior. What is the approach here? It actually gamifies the behavior that we want to see displayed by our travelers. And it also rewards it. The way that it works is that on the platform actually offers a curated collection of different experiences, adventures that are only there because they were classified and they were evaluated by the team as sustainable. And they have different elements that we deem as important for sustainability. So some might be, simply being outdoors and being conscious of the natural environment, its beauty, but also of the likely impact that your movements can make. So That could be something, that could be an easy illustration. But there's also experiences where there's very mindful engagement of local community to provide the experience, selection of local providers to ensure that the services, the food, the products that go into the holiday, the vacation experience are actually all locally based. Now, in addition to curating these experiences and sort of pre-designing with sustainability in mind, or actually taking sustainability as a non-negotiable principle, the system, the platform, Adventure Junkie, actually gives points. And so if an experience is simply about being outdoors and being conscious and enjoying your natural environment, you might have a relatively, you get, let's say, 10 points. But if your holiday experience, your adventure, includes also volunteering and staying with the local community or a homestay, eating local food, buying local souvenirs, then suddenly the points that you get for that trip could be 50. So based on this, actually, participants in the platform are in sort of a competition. So while they travel and enjoy themselves, they actually seek to optimize and engage in experiences that give them more points and move them up the rankings. And what's really interesting is that instead of the flipped approach of educating travelers before they go and sort of making sure that they're responsible and make the choices because this is what is expected and what's the right thing, actually here the mechanism is flipped. Travelers are attracted because it's interesting, it's exciting, it's fun, it's competitive, but as they go and choose their experiences and they look for higher points, they understand what are the factors that make an experience richer in terms of points. So they see that it's better to sleep with a local community or a small bed and breakfast that's locally owned. It's better to eat local food. It's better to volunteer. So they are kind of indirectly educated and motivated to begin doing the right thing without actually going through the tedious sort of imposing approach of here's what you have to do, please make sure that you do it. So we are actually producing the desired effect in a gamified way, and we are increasing a sense of achievement, but also impact. So from engineering to behavioral perspective, instead of educating the 1.4 billion travelers who are now trotting the globe, we actually are using nudges in order to make them, incentivize them to do the right thing without that being an effort for them. So these are the examples that I wanted to give you. And one more, which I will share again in the form of a video before we actually move to the break. Give me a second here. Here you go. And then we will take a break. Just a second. Let me just start this. Okay. So this is a great study. Probably some of you know about it, but I would like to play it because there's a lot of behavior smart thinking in this. So.
Now, if you're heading to the Pacific island of Palau, you'll be signing up to a new pledge.
Human impact on Earth's environment is one of the biggest challenges facing the world today. The small island nation of Palau was feeling these impacts acutely. Tourists were damaging reefs, littering oceans and poaching protected species. But how could a small local population with limited resources police the high volume of visitors? What if we made the tourists police themselves? Introducing the Palau Pledge, a first-of-its-kind immigration policy for good. All visitors now need to sign an environmental pledge to gain admittance into Palau. Stamped into the passport of international arrivals, the pledge is a formal promise to Palau's children.
Children of Palau,
I take this pledge
to preserve and protect your beautiful and unique island home.
To implement this policy, government, the tourist industry and citizens were brought together. A new visa entry stamp was designed and issued in multiple languages. And immigration laws were permanently changed.
The jolt that comes with the pledge is the recognition that, hey, I can make a difference.
But we didn't stop at the passport stamp. We redesigned the tourism experience via a website, an in-flight film, a passport insert, local education, business accreditation, signage, penalties and collateral. Launched at the UN, the Palau Pledge has been praised by international leaders and groups. Influencers helped inspire people to take the pledge online in solidarity with Palau.
Are you already seeing tourists behaving differently?
The awareness level is very high.
Leonardo DiCaprio is being quick to endorse the pledge.
The reaction on social media has been widespread.
The Palau Pledge has raised global awareness of the responsibility this generation has to the next. But its biggest impact is local, in Palau.
I hope my children can see the beautiful place as I see today.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. I'm not going to go into the details, but I want to mention that we are now seeing a great increase of the use of pledges around the industry across many destinations. And the reality is that not many are designed as well as the Palau example, and this is why I like using this one, because signing a pledge somewhere which is not tied to the location, to the destination upon arrival, or when you're already at the destination, doesn't, again, it relates to that example that I mentioned earlier. You might read about climate impact of food, but then you don't actually translate that into actions. The same thing here. Signing somewhere is not sufficient. What is really efficient here is that it's official, it's in your passport, so there's a stronger sense of commitment. But then throughout the experience, there's elements that remind you and kind of nudge you to behave accordingly, and that's really important. So it's not only the pledge, but actually the whole program that ensures that behavior follows expectations. Okay, so just quickly, summary of the examples that illustrate what is behavior smart. The idea is that soft redesign of decision journeys or behavioral dynamics can really trigger much more powerful effects and less investments than the heavy classical engineering approaches. There's really a great power in applying behavior thinking and identifying the barriers and incentives that drive certain behavior in order to change that. And behavioral optimization can really produce powerful results while we continue to look for the longer-term technical and engineering solutions that we talked about. And I do want to point out that when we think about behavior smart, it can actually apply both to commercial success as well as sustainability. We can use behavioral insights to optimize product design, service design, pricing, promotion, in order to increase the profitability and optimize the investments that we make as a business or as a destination. But we can also optimize the sustainability, the footprint of our operations, and strengthen the positive impacts that we want to have, whether as a destination or as a tourism business. So, thank you for your patience. We're going to take a break now, and so it's 11:03 right now. If we can come back, or actually 11:04. So if we can come back at 10 past, we will continue. And meanwhile, I will post here the link for Carbonaid, so more of you can read further. I hope this was interesting, and I look forward to seeing you back. Okay, so I hope you're back and you were able to grab coffee or another healthy refreshment. As I promised in the chat area, I shared the link to the website of the providers of the Carbonaid service. They are based in Gothenburg in Sweden. So if you have interest, feel free to reach out or let me know. I'm more than happy to make an introduction. Okay, so after talking about behavior smart and what really it could look like in the tourism context, I would like to kind of bring things to our own context and talk about why this kind of thinking can help and why is it relevant to our destinations and our business. I want to start by sort of reminding us that in tourism we have a slightly different exchange than in, let's say, most of the other businesses. So if, let's say, in the classical product market exchange, where, for example, you're buying a fashion item, the provider or the retailer is going to try to really identify your needs and then align with them, help you find the best possible item that is really the best fit for you and the purposes that you're looking for. Now, in tourism, we have a slightly different exchange, and it has been wrong to assume that we need to align to the travelers entirely. Because in our case, in our industry, the exchange is more like opening the door for somebody to come to your house as a guest. And so it's not that much about the traveler. Of course, they matter and they're part of that exchange. But tourism is actually about the local place, the local people, not that much about the visitors. Tourism, if we really go back and think why we want to do tourism, tourism is to make local people's life better and the place better, to enhance the locality and the people, the community, rather than the visitors. So in that sense, destinations, just like you would do with your home, should not just keep the door open and let anybody in. They should they should be making a proactive choice as to who comes in. And as host, we as destinations, as tourism businesses that operate in destinations, we should be setting the norms for behavior. And that behavior should be, these norms should apply to travelers. So we should make sure that we suggest and that we nudge the behavior that we think aligns with our culture, with our setting, and with our desired interactions. But destinations should also be proactive in setting, and business communities operating in destinations should be also proactive in setting the norms that they would adhere to, so that if there's a fragile natural area, none of the businesses operating in the destination makes it possible to go and visit that and have destructive impact. So destinations should be the proactive norm setters that guide behavior, both the local suppliers as well as the guests. Now, why doesn't it matter? Why doesn't it make sense for guests to actually be the main decision makers, which is what has been happening in many, many destinations? The fact of the matter is that guests or our tourists are here in the destination for a short period of time. They don't have the time to develop the link, the desire, the fondness towards the place and its people that we as hosts, as people who live in that place and operate in that place, do business in that place, actually have. So we are really the more natural stewards of our place and our assets than travelers. So in that sense, it couldn't be expected that they would be making better decisions about our place and our community than we ourselves. And also, travelers by nature, the traveler psychology is such that when they engage in a holiday experience, they focus on getting the best out of the experience. And in fact, they actually release many of the controls that they would normally practice at home. So for example, if somebody at home is very strict about eating certain foods or recycling, just to take a simple example, when they go on holiday, they might just say, okay, nothing, the world will not end if I don't recycle for this 1 week. So this is just the natural way in which the controls of behavior of travelers work. So in that sense, to take a very, very simple example, and that's with changing towels. In the Nordics, this is no longer the case. Usually the defaults are that towels are not changed. But really globally, the practice that still remains popular is that at any accommodation, you as a guest are given the freedom to choose whether you want your towels changed or not. And the reality is that the default option, speaking of default, is usually that your towels are changed. So what does that mean for the traveler who is focused on many other things and not on whether their towel was changed this morning or not? They're going, in many cases, with the default. And if the default is that they're going to be changed, they will be changed. Now, think about that carefully, even though the example is simplistic. Why would something like frequent changing of towels, which we know impacts our environment, our nature, in our place, why would we let somebody else decide instead of us? So this is just an illustration of why and how in our operations we can use behavior smart thinking in order to actually be the proactive of behavior and social norms for the travelers, so that they actually can do the best that we think is best for our place and our community, rather than make decisions which are automated and disengaged, simply because they shouldn't be the stewards of our place. So this is the behavioral thinking that we would use in destinations. And I want to just briefly mention the example of Västmanland region in Sweden, which was the first destination that attempted or experimented with behaviors optimization on destination level. And this is a project that I did with the region, and that's the output of that was the manual that we are using here. I'm going to stop for a moment and just look at the questions. Lily, I have no idea what's the carbon footprint of coffee. There's actually a free carbon calculator of food, I believe produced by WWF. So maybe we can just punch that in and see what it happens. Ingrid, you raise a good question, suggesting that it's really different and difficult to point out who represents and who manages the destination. You're absolutely right, but that's why I mentioned that in addition to the official authorities, whether it's a tourism board or another entity that is the destination, the DMO, the ecosystem, the industry ecosystem players are also really stewards of the destination. So in that sense, based on what they want to see preserved and how they want their destination to look, they can agree on what are the norms of behavior that they are going to follow as businesses. I gave the example of not going or not taking or not allowing, in any case, to travelers to go to places where we know they can have a negative impact. And then they sort of sustain the application of this norm by helping each other and sort of monitoring each other. There's many cases We know that today's travelers are super independent. They're equipped with wearable technology that gives them the sense that they can go in many places. That causes all sorts of problems and challenges with safety, with security, but also with environmental impact. So that's another challenge. It's not easy to come up with a solution, but it's certainly likely that there could be behavioral mechanisms that actually could at least lower the rate at which this happens. Okay, moving on. I think I mentioned to you in June about this project. So I'll briefly go through some of the story, and then we can talk about how the Smart Ways manual actually can help with our specific needs in the context of this project. So the way that we started this project was actually by sitting together with two of the colleagues from Västmanland region and really starting with a white sheet of paper. They approached me because they knew this was my expertise. They had listened to some of my talks, and they really wanted to do something with behavior, even though it was not clear what that was, because there's no established practice for destinations to optimize behaviorally. So that was probably one of the most interesting things of this project, is that we sat with a white sheet of paper and we started breaking down the question of what does it mean for a destination to be behaviorally optimized. So our decision was to experiment in a small scale. We started with a very long list of what are important items for the destination, and what are things that they wish to see improved. Just like the survey that you completed earlier, where you identified your priorities, they actually went through the same process, but in a dialogue format where we identified. We decided that we want to work with a set of pilot businesses because it's, as we said, our destinations are in fact ecosystems of a lot of players. So we needed people who are members of that ecosystem to actually help us identify and execute and test. And on the basis of these practices, we actually extracted insights that allowed us to produce destination level solutions. Now, the idea is that when you have, and this is what we are seeking here as effect with this community, but when you have many players in one destination apply one and the same thing that maybe improves the use of single-use plastics by 20%, which on a single business level might not be huge. But if you have a whole community across one destination apply that behavioral solution and really minimize whether it's plastics or energy and so on, then the compiled magnitude of the effect ends up being quite significant. So what is behavioral optimization of a destination? It is precisely this: identifying areas where we want to see improvement, and then together cumulatively applying these solutions in order to achieve performance. And this was the idea of the manual, to make it possible for more businesses to actually apply these and strengthen their commercial success, because as you've noted, many of the solutions or the tactics are commercially oriented, seek to improve profitability, and of course, footprint and sustainability. So the interventions, as mentioned, were a mix of such, again, looking at profitability and sustainability. We identified them on the basis of looking for interventions that are easy to execute, that don't require a lot of investment, and we tested all of them before describing them in the manual, in order actually to begin to really break the process down into steps that are understandable and easy to execute for a business. Actually, that manual, before being what it is, went through the hands of a community of businesses that kept bringing it back and saying, you explained here, this term, but it actually sounds a little bit academic. Can you put it in easier to understand words? So we made sure that the text and the content, everything is really easily digestible and executable for busy business professionals and destination professionals in our industry. So I see that we have about 35 minutes. So I'm not going to go and describe actually the different interventions that we did, because they're also described in the manual, which I really hope that you will allocate a coffee break to browse through and extract value from. But just to give you a sense, we applied interventions that sought to optimize energy consumption, and this could apply to water consumption as well. In this case, it was electricity. We looked at an intervention that helped optimize menus in order to increase profitability and encourage purchases. We looked at addressing a challenge with the inability of an operation to present fixed prices, but then also to tackle the fact that people not being able to see prices were actually being suspicious. So we were able to come up with a solution that actually worked, and it both provided a sense of the price, but it also didn't really mislead people. Another intervention was the room cleaning opt-out, something that I see increasingly adopted by hotels in the Nordics, regretfully not everywhere else, but also how this is done is important, because not all hotels actually apply it with the mechanism that incentivizes travelers in the right way. And we also did something that will be helpful and valuable to us in our discussion in a moment, and that relates to encouraging the purchase and the use of local products and local services, making local more attractive. And as I mentioned, the key source that we use to actually translate all of the insights and the learning from this experimental program for behavioral optimization was actually to produce this behavior smart manual, or manual for behavior smart with behavior smart tactics, in a way that's actually easily applicable and adoptable by as many businesses in the community or the ecosystem of the Västmanland region tourism industry. Okay, so before we move actually to our own questions and interventions tactics, I wanted to ask you, or to get a sense actually, about how many people have actually used or seen the manual, so that I know how much details I need to go into. So you should be seeing now a quick question, and I would like you to please let me know whether you have just browsed, or you have read it in detail, or you haven't seen it at all. So please take a moment to do that. Okay, we seem to be ready. Okay, so we have about, so most of you have actually not seen, and the ones who have actually seen that or reviewed that have simply browsed through that. Okay, well, I will be taking a more than detailed overview of how you can use that in the context of the specific solutions that we're gonna that we have prioritized. Okay, can you tell me whether we can just continue, or I was planning to take another break before we dive into the manual, but given that we have about 31 minutes left, I just want to see whether you feel we needed maybe another 2 minutes. Okay, Ingrid suggests that we continue. Okay, if somebody really wants to take a break, please let me know. or simply take a break and then come back to the recording. Thank you, Anna-Lena. Okay, so just looking at the priorities that we have identified, the top 3 priorities, as you all know, that have come out as most important for our destination, our community of destinations, is to encourage buying locally as much as possible, to reduce negative impacts on our nature, on our natural environment, and then strengthening the local culture and identity of our places. And I want to propose several of the tactics that are described in details in the manual as possible solutions that we hope you will apply, and in order to achieve the desired priorities. So the first behavior smart tactic that I would like to share with you is increasing the appeal of local products, local services. As we know, the best way to strengthen the economic impact of the travel economy is to ensure that there's maximum linkages to local services and local products. So this is quite an important aspect of strengthening the sustainability of travel operations. So what does that mean? The reality is that local services and products are not always presented or perceived by travelers as the most attractive and the highest quality. So, in addition to the attractiveness that comes with the local and the authentic, I recommend that we emphasize on the perceptions on strengthening the perceptions for quality and strengthening the motivation through the sense of higher quality. So how does that happen? The way that we do that is by strengthening the visibility or enhancing the story that comes with each of the local products and explaining why it's higher quality. So let's, for example, take a local local food products which come from local pharmacies and local food producers. The way that we can present them so that they increase the sense of quality and strengthen the perception for quality and the desire to buy among travelers is by presenting more information about them that talks about how they were prepared. It reveals the traditions that local farmers use in order to present or in order to prepare the specific product, and tells the story of the farmers themselves. So that connection to the local person, to the real person, to the local farmer, and the story of how the local cheese was produced with pure natural ingredients, following traditional methods, is something that increases the appeal and the perception that this is high quality product that is much better than non-local alternatives. So this is a great tactic that can actually lead to increased local buying. How do we do that? Or what are the actual steps of carrying such tactic out? Where we need to start is first by getting more information about the local products that are available within our destination, or that our company can weave into the experiences that it offers. So, for example, you can go and study the origin or the production methods of local crafts or arts. You can do the same for local food products and their origin and the ways that they're produced. Once you have that information, you can structure it in nicely designed, visible communication posters or postcards, which are placed in the space or in the moment when a traveler might be making a decision buy them. So when you present that information in an attractive and an appealing way, in the moment when the traveler is likely to make the decision, you can influence them at that spot. So once we prepare these posters, we can place them in the areas where we are seeking to influence this decision making, and then of course we would monitor impacts. In order to really study or make sure that we monitor the impacts of what we're doing, we need to first collect benchmarking data. So before you do anything, before you change anything, study the quantity of local products that are purchased. After that, roll out the changes, roll out your posters or other information vehicles, and then study what will be the change. That will give us a sense of how much we have impacted in the readiness of local travelers visiting our destination to buy. So, moving on to another solution, which relates to our desire to reducing impact and making tourism operations more environmentally friendly. This is a solution that addresses the likelihood that travelers are not going to really invest too much thinking and too much emotion in being environmentally friendly and making choices that are purely driven by environmental behavior. As we know, realistically, the travelers who commit to pure environmental behavior are actually a very small segment of the global travel market. So the way to actually ensure that when visitors come to our destination, they behave in a way that we find is best for our nature and our culture, requires that we are the ones who incorporate the desired behavior in the traveler experiences that our destination or our company offers. So what does that mean? Just quick examples. If the destination or your operations are interested in eliminating single-use plastics, then the design of the experiences that you offer should not allow for the use of single-use plastics. So even if your travelers, the travelers that you're hosting, are not as sensitive to avoiding plastics, you can automatically weave that into the itinerary that you have for them and the whole experience by welcoming them and gifting them a reusable bottle that they can use throughout their trip, and making sure that in your itinerary, in the program that you offer, there are special water stops that are incorporated throughout the days that the guests are with you. That way, it automatically eliminates the chance that they will go and buy a plastic bottle and they will drop it somewhere, that they will drop the empty bottle somewhere. Similarly, we can weave in actions that are good contributions to our destination, whether it would be, for example, planting trees for a local reforestation project and weaving it into a half-day hike that you're offering anyway, or it will be voluntary support for a local visitor infrastructure project in a nearby national park that again is weaved into a hike or a mountain bike experience. It doesn't really matter. But weaving in such experiences or using the design in order to nudge and travelers to behave in a desired way and to be responsible to our destination is really the best way to ensure that they will follow the norms that we think are appropriate in our destination. So the way that you would normally execute something like that is by identifying the areas in which you would like to contribute to positive impact in your destination, or if you're a destination, prioritizing the areas in which you would like local businesses to contribute, whether it's supporting restoration of natural areas or forests, whether it's improving or helping with visitor infrastructure, whether it's local volunteering or eliminating single-use plastics. You would identify this area and then test a certain tactic, whether it's the gifting of a reusable bottle or some of the other activities that I mentioned. You would incorporate them, and then of course, you would try to get feedback from your travelers. The manual that we are using as basis for this discussion here includes a specific set of questions that I recommend you ask your travelers in order to understand how they respond to these responsible activities that are part of the design of the experience. How do they feel about them, whether they're designed appropriately. This feedback will give you two important values. One is you will understand whether you need to make some adjustments or you need to improve the design of the activity itself. The second important thing is that you will have evidence as to whether this experience, even though it's not really proactively selected by the traveler, you are the one who weaved it in, whether it actually gives them more value. The reality is that most travelers might not proactively seek to make the more responsible choice, but once they are given the opportunity to make it, to actually do something good, they feel great about it. So in addition to the great experience that your destination or your company is offering, that additional responsible act makes them feel good about themselves. So it actually enhances the value that they extract from this experience. So moving on to the third tactic that I would like to share with you. This is a solution that seeks to improve the environmental operations or impact of accommodation service providers especially. This is opting out, giving travelers the opportunity to opt out of room cleaning. And this is a practice that I see now frequently practiced by operations throughout the Nordics. The one thing that I would like to clarify is that how the opting out is incentivized makes a lot of makes a big difference. What do I mean? So, what is giving the opportunities to travelers to opt out of room cleaning? As you know, the default practice in all accommodations is that rooms are cleaned every day. What opting out means is that you give travelers the opportunity to not to actually opt out of cleaning, which means that they don't want their room to be clean. They don't want the room to be made. And what that does is that it ultimately saves the use of energy, the use of extra water, the use of detergents, which have negative impact on the environment. What usually happens is that when travelers are given the option to opt out, they are incentivized by a message that suggests that the savings from the room cleaning are going to be donated to a charity, to a popular charity, or to a local project. This is a great idea. Another option is also to actually issue a small coupon for your traveler that they can use at the hotel bar, or that they can use at the hotel restaurant, maybe for a dessert or for an additional drink. The important thing here is it doesn't really matter what is the whether you are incentivizing travelers with a dessert or with a charity donation. What really is important is that the travelers should have evidence about the fact that they have contributed to something and should have should extract value from this. So if you are announcing or using donation as an incentive, you should make sure that when the guest comes back to their hotel, they receive a small card that confirms that they have donated, or they receive a message in their email so that we can save paper, but something that gives them the sense that actually there is an outcome from their activity. If nothing happens, which is what most hotels using room cleaning opt-out do, then it gives travelers the sense that maybe this donation didn't happen, or there's no evidence, and that actually in the long run discourages that behavior. So we should make sure that regardless of whether we are offering dessert or donation, we do something that gives automatically the traveler the sense that there's an outcome, there's a direct result of their decision to save a little bit of energy, a little bit of detergents to save from cleaning. A similar solution relates to related to accommodation operations is the change of towel change. I mentioned earlier, I gave the example that suggests that really it shouldn't be that difficult to execute this redesign solution. And this is really to flip the default options of changing towels and make the default option that towels are not changed. So what does that mean? That means that when guests stay at a hotel, by default, the hotel doesn't change towels. And of course, if the stay of the guest is longer, the hotel can determine whether maybe on day 3 or day 5 they still would change the towel. But the default is that the towel is not changed daily. Of course, as high quality service providers, we need to be able to give the travelers the opportunity to still have their towels changed if something happened and the towel they're using is no longer appropriate for use. That, of course, would require that they would take some action. They would call the reception or do something proactively to indicate that they would like their towel changed. As we mentioned earlier, with the examples I gave during the first part, by flipping the options, we really dramatically increase the likelihood that towels will not be changed, which ultimately leads to preserving of water and, of course, wasting unnecessary detergents, which again impacts the environment, and of course energy for the washing devices. I hope that these 4 tactics feel relevant and valuable to you because they're not too difficult to execute, but at the same time are likely to produce efficiencies or increase efficiencies just through adjustment of behavior in very non-invasive ways. Now, in close, I would like to say a word about ethics. Having more knowledge or understanding how human behavior can be influenced comes with more responsibility. So unfortunately, in the broader market, we already see examples of companies that are applying knowledge about nudges and other choice architecture solutions in unethical ways that seeks to mislead, it seeks to manipulate travelers, clients. We are in, I believe that we are in a community where this is simply not an option. But I do want to indicate that using behavioral solutions requires another level of ethical considerations. So, in closing, I would like to just summarize the key points that I made during this presentation, which I hope was interesting to you and inspiring for you. What I wanted to start with before my summary is just to remind you that we discussed the opportunity of creating a Facebook group that would assist and give you guidance and allow us to exchange advice as you are experimenting with the tactics that I shared. Most of you already sent the email and your Facebook names, so we will initiate the Facebook group. So quickly, just a summary of the key points. As you remember, at the beginning, we started with the premise that many systems in our society, including in our own industry, are designed around behavioral assumptions which seem to be unrealistic. And this is what creates this favorable environment for using insights from behavioral economics. What behavioral economics tells us is that the elements, the format, the structuring of information, and the context in which it's presented can have really very powerful impact on the perceptions and decisions of travelers as they engage in their travels, but also the tourism professionals, whether it's politicians making decisions on national level, whether it's destination professionals that make decisions on national or regional level. All of us are susceptible to such influences. Behavior smart adjustments can produce really powerful effects in terms of strengthening commercial practices and the commercial efficiency of businesses and destinations, as well as managing the footprint of the tourism economy on local level. We have the opportunity to benefit from behavior smart thinking, insights from behavioral economics, and really achieve more with less in order to, through basically being the proactive setters of the behavioral norms in our home destinations. As I mentioned at the close of the presentation, effective behavioral tactics require experimentation and testing, but also responsibility for ethical application. With this, I would like to thank you and invite you to collaborate together so that we can nudge for good and make tourism even a better and friendlier industry to our destinations, to our cultures, and our nature. Thank you.